A green card, also known as a permanent resident card, is meant to be permanent, as the name suggests. But USCIS, through their social media posts and even the VP of the US, J.D. Vance, have made statements that suggest that the permanent resident card was never meant to be permanent. I mean, I think fundamentally, the VP misunderstands what permanent residency is when he made that statement. But anyway, this video is gonna be about 3 ways in which you can actually lose your green card. And USCIS seems to suggest that they are more aggressively going after some people with permanent residence, seeking to rescind people's green cards in some instances. Whether or not they actually succeed in doing that, whether or not they actually implement those policies is yet to be seen. But I want to discuss 3 ways in which you can actually lose your green card, and which I do see happening in some instances. One of the most common ways I see law-abiding permanent residents losing their green cards is through their travel history. So if you depart the US for more than 1 year continuously, there is a presumption that you've abandoned your green card. In reality, there are some instances where you could leave for more than a year, even several years continuously without actually abandoning your green card, but you're gonna have a hard time when you come back. In the airport, the customs officers are probably gonna ask you to voluntarily abandon your green card by signing Form I-407, or they will place you into removal proceedings if you refuse to sign that form, in which you'll have to see a judge. Eventually, customs will allow you into the US. They'll give you a notice to appear in immigration court, charging you as an arriving alien seeking admission into the US. And then you'll have to go in front of an immigration judge and explain your long absence from the United States. If you ended up spending more than a year outside of the US through things that were not within your control, let's say you had a medical emergency and you literally couldn't leave the hospital for more than a year, or you were targeted by a foreign government and incarcerated for political reasons, or whatever the case may be. And the reason I give that example is because there's a case that flows directly out of that for an Iranian national who went to their grandparents' funeral in Iran and was actually detained and incarcerated for several years. And then with their green card, they try to fly back into the US, they're placed into removal proceedings, and then the immigration judge ultimately determined that they did not have the intent to spend more than 1 year continuously outside of the US, and therefore they continue to be a permanent resident. Even though the actual regulations say that you need to spend more than 1 year continuously outside of the US for there to be a presumption of abandoning your green card, customs officers recently seem to really give you a hard time if you spend more than 6 months continuously outside of the US. So the 6-month rule really comes from the naturalization continuous presence requirement, where if you depart the US for more than 6 months, it's presumed that there has been a break in your continuous presence in the US, and that could restart some of the timeline calculations before you're eligible for naturalization. But today, I wouldn't recommend any permanent residents spend more than 6 months continuously outside of the US. And to make matters even worse, even if you leave for much less than 6 months, let's say you leave for 3 months, and then you come back for a week, leave for 3 months, come back for a week. I see people do this all the time. There could be major problems when you try to re-enter the US eventually. The customs officers might say, hey, we're looking at your travel history, and it's clear to us that you're not actually living in the United States. And then you can get taken to the back room, secondary inspection, and then get interviewed to see, where are you working, where are you living, where is your family living. Basically, the purpose of these questions is to determine whether you're intending to reside and live permanently in the US at that time. And if you basically say, like, I'm working outside of the US, my entire family is outside of the US, I'm not even paying rent right now, I don't have a vehicle anymore, I sold it right before I moved, they might have enough right there to begin removal proceedings or to heavily pressure you into signing the I-407 to voluntarily abandon your green card. I've said this in other videos, before you sign I-407, you should speak to an attorney, because the customs officers might say something like, if you're not living in the US, you should sign this form, and then when you go back to the consulate to get a new green card, it'll go a long way that you voluntarily abandoned your green card. Yes and no, that may or may not be true, and you might not even have a pathway to a permanent resident card in the future if you no longer have, for example, a qualifying family member like a US citizen spouse who could petition for you again. By the way, one other side note, we are seeing people have problems even renewing their green cards in some instances where they spend too much time continuously outside of the US. This is a very recent phenomenon. I just started under Trump 2.0, like since February 2025, where some people who filed the I-90 to renew their green card are getting a request for evidence asking for a detailed explanation of their travel history. I'm going to do another video specifically on this, but just something to keep in mind. And, to the extent possible, I've been advising people, if you need to spend more time outside of the US, come back, apply for a re-entry permit, wait until you do your biometrics appointment and provide your fingerprints, and then leave the US. So then you don't have to worry about it for the next 2 years. The second way I see some permanent residents losing their green cards and USCIS more aggressively targeting people or referring the cases to ICE so that ICE can issue a notice to appear in immigration court is when people have criminal history. I mean, this one might seem obvious, but you may have had a crime for a long time ago that never popped up that is now giving you problems, either when you re-enter the US as a permanent resident or when you apply for certain benefits, including possibly the I-90. If you have certain criminal history, and these can be a lot of different types of crimes, whether it's domestic violence or a theft offense or drug or alcohol offense, including multiple DUIs, even though one DUI by itself might not have issues. Once you have multiple DUIs, if it's aggravated, there are times where that could result in immigration consequences. There are other classifications of crimes such as national security offenses, money laundering, any financial crimes. These all can have immigration consequences. There's one thing specifically I want to mention in this video. So some crimes are considered to be crimes involving moral turpitude, and it might not seem like a serious crime. It might even be a low-level misdemeanor, not a felony, but it might have serious immigration consequences. If you've been convicted of one crime involving moral turpitude within 5 years of becoming a green card holder or permanent resident, so you get your green card within the next 5 years, if you're convicted of one of these crimes, you're deportable. If you're convicted of two of these crimes at any time, even outside of that 5-year period, you're deportable. If you're convicted of one of these crimes at any time, you're also inadmissible. So, for example, if you get your green card in the year 2015, and then in 2021, more than 5 years later, you're convicted of one crime involving moral turpitude, it's gonna be crickets from USCIS. You're not gonna hear anything. You're not gonna get a notice to appear in court because you're not deportable. But you are inadmissible. So the moment you leave the US and you try to come back, you're gonna get a notice to appear in immigration court. The remedy to this oftentimes is to wait long enough until you have 5 years of good character and then naturalize. And then after you become a US citizen, you can then travel freely without worrying about being placed into removal proceedings. All right, guys, a third way I see people being placed into removal proceedings is for not timely filing their form I-751. If you've never heard of this form, it might not apply to your green card. It's for people who get a 2-year conditional green card. And by the way, actually in some instances, I should mention, some people erroneously, by mistake, get a 10-year green card when they should have gotten a 2-year green card, and this becomes a major issue when it's time for naturalization. But before I get ahead of myself, let me just explain what it is. So if you're, for example, married to a US citizen, and on the day you get your green card, you've been married for less than 2 years, you should be a conditional resident, and your green card should expire in 2 years. And 90 days before it expires, you're required to file this form, I-751. Some people just mistakenly file an I-90 to renew their green card and get the 10-year green card. And sometimes USCIS will mistakenly issue the 10-year green card. In fact, I see that happen all the time. And they might even renew their green card 10 years later by filing another I-90, no issue. When it's time for naturalization, USCIS says, wait a second, you were supposed to remove the conditions on your residency. You never did that. Therefore, it's our position that 2 years after you got your conditional green card, when you filed the I-90 and we mistakenly gave you a 10-year green card, your residency actually terminated. And then you go from applying for citizenship to being placed into removal proceedings. Now, I've had this happen a couple times with people who like did their cases before they came to us. They came to us for naturalization, or after they applied to naturalize themselves and they get a notice of intent to deny or a denial decision saying this is why we're denying it. And then afterwards they're placed into removal proceedings. It is fixable in some instances. For example, if you're still married to that US citizen, we can just file that I-751 in removal proceedings directly with the immigration judge. We might also be able to file the I-751 in a different category if you're not still married. For example, you could file the I-751 if you can demonstrate that your removal will cause extreme hardship. And it depends on what country you're from, your life circumstances, the conditions in your life at that time. But there might be some remedies available if that happens. So it's not like automatically a deportation sentence, but at that point you definitely need an immigration lawyer. This is also why most of the time it's a good idea to do a Freedom of Information Act request to get a complete copy of your immigration file, your A file, before you file the N-400 application. All right, guys, so those are 3 ways I actually see people losing their green cards. By the way, just a side note, sometimes USCIS will mistakenly issue a green card, or they realize that they made an error. And now USCIS is even looking at some people's social media posts, so they can initiate rescission proceedings within the first 5 years of you getting a green card. And it could go something like this, like they say, hey, on social media, we saw you're a member of all these groups. When you filed your green card application on form I-485, it asks you if you're a member of any groups and you answered no. We believe you lied. So now we're gonna begin rescission proceedings or removal proceedings to try to take away your green card. That hasn't really started happening yet. USCIS is threatening it through their social media, and we've seen some information suggesting that they might start doing stuff like that. If stuff like that actually begins happening, it would be a crazy scenario, and I'll definitely report back on it, make a video directly on that to help warn people about what to look out for, especially with your social media posts. If you guys are interested in learning more about family-based immigration, immigration policy changes under Trump, things like that, be sure to subscribe. If you need any assistance with your immigration matter, specifically, you want to go through everything during a consultation, you can find my information in the video description below. I'd be happy to consult with you. And if you need assistance, I'd be happy to represent you in your immigration matter. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time for another video.